People of Reddit working in extreme situations as offshore oil rigs, miners, seamen etc. What was your FCK this? I'm out moment? Not me, but my brother worked on a North Sea oil barge. His buddies found out he would be getting married after the current 2-week shift, and in the middle of the night they pinned him down, shaved his entire body and gave him tattoos using indelible marker pens. He had some explaining to do on his honeymoon and stopped working offshore after that. IDK of extreme, but I have 9 years in the Navy, a submariner. My ducky moment that set it in was when we were working pretty much 14 hours days 7 days a week in Reddit. Think we did it for over a month and then we went out to sea for about 3 months. Glad I didn't have a family then, but just being at work all the time and stuck in a metal tube for months on end just sucked. The couple of fond memories don't outweigh the massive number of stupid. I was a trainee on a North Sea drilling rig, a mud engineer. We were drilling and hit a pocket of H2S gas, explosive and highly toxic. We had gas detectors which went off the scale. The pit room, big tanks of mud with huge pumps to pump mud down the well, was evacuated, but the mud pumps were still running. Somebody had to go back in, open the emergency air ventilation and shut down the pumps. I drew the short straw and put the respirator on, very old and possibly ducked, and wandered in. That was the longest 2 minutes of my life. I don't work offshore anymore. Dad was a traveling salesman and was very dedicated. Insisted on cross-country trips for high-end clients. Would go days without sleep, traveling through tribal areas and mountain highways dead of night. But he was also a Nave guy in his 20s, so picked up a random hitchhiker because it was raining and he felt bad, the dude pulled a gun on him, told him stop the car. My dad had cash in the car, and in addition to being Nave, was also stubborn as it and started accelerating. So if the guy shot him, the car would go flying off the hill. They reached some gas station with armed tribesmen. Tribal people aren't very nice to criminals, and the hijacker quickly put his gun away and walked off. My dad left the business after a couple more reckless incidents and family pressure. They gave us a pizza party. I spent a few months loading trucks for a major package shipping company. Every night, starting at 11 PM, I would stack boxes, one every 12 seconds, supposedly. In one night, I'd fill at least one of those giant 18-wheeler trailers with boxes, crates, industrial materials, car parts, flowers by mail, presents, and an endless flow of Amazon packages. I worked each night with not enough sleep, doing exhausting labor, moving heavy dangerous machinery, and got heavy packages dropped on my head almost every night. We got one 15-minute break a night. One day, during our break, they told us that our section had been the most productive in the shipping hub that month, and as such, we were going to be given pizza. By the way, we couldn't actually relax during our break. We had to listen to announcements and safety tips. The next night, sure as God made little green apples, we got pizza to eat as quickly as we could during our break. And as I sat there, eating my kinda stale, cheapest possible pizza, I thought to myself, duck this. I don't need this job that bad. I never went back after that shift. I worked in a shipyard off the Great Lakes on tankers and cargo ships. I'll preface this by saying I loved and miss this job every day. I work in an office now and it's boring. One time I was working in a bilge tank with another guy named Ryan. We repaired a section of a bulkhead, cut out and replaced a section with new steel. We had the old 4x4 piece of steel tied up, made sure our knot was secure. He went up top to pull it up and I stayed down on the catwalk to help the load clear the ladder. Halfway up the rope snapped and the steel fell about an inch from me onto the catwalk, barely missing my head. I look up at Ryan for confirmation that I almost died. I pick up the piece to tie up and try again, and the catwalk collapses under the combined weight. Just another day though. My last day there I was helping my dad and a couple other guys move staging. I'm leaning over a hole between decks reaching for a plank. These are 100 pounds planks of wood. 2 guys below, 2 guys up top. Just as I get my hand on the plank, both guys below heave upwards, crushing my hand between it and the deck. I instantly knew my thumb was broken and walked out immediately, never to return. Yeah, my dad broke my thumb. I work for a contracting company who handles a lot of maintenance in an iron ore mine up in Canada. One of the many sketchiest moments I've ever had was having to crawl on a structural beam 50 feet in the air underneath a floating crusher hopper and hold on occasionally when the haul trucks would dump 250 plus tons of rocks only a couple feet above my head. What made it even more terrible wasn't the fact that the whole plant would shake, but all the structural support plates actually reinforcing the hopper walls were all sheared off. I've had hydraulic jacks break off their strong backs and go flying past my head. I've seen a co-worker get launched 6 feet in the air by a belt being pulled taut by a shuttle. Things fall down and nearly kill someone. Not to mention heat exhaustion while working on the induration machines. Building sized furnaces used to bake iron pellets, easily 122 degrees plus. Or outside changing conveyor belt rollers in -40. I've had my fair share of near misses and seen a bit of wild it. Mines can be pretty dangerous. People do lose fingers, hands, arms and sometimes their lives. People like to think that we've improved in safety, and in some aspects it's true. However, the attitude is still very much you want the job, do it. Was working as an arborist on a very windy day. I was up in a tree cutting branches that were constantly moving in the wind when I heard a snap. A tree beside me just broke in half. I noped out of there pretty damn quick. I worked on a fisherman's boat with my dad when I was a lad. It sucked and the smell was horrible, but I definitely felt cool manly being a boy of the sea. Worst moment was when we pulled a big marlin out and it started eating everywhere and my dad made me clean it up. Knew a drilling supervisor who quit when the company we were with decided to do night moves with the rigs. In a previous job, one of his crew had been killed on a night move. His parting comments to me was, when the bucket of it becomes heavier than the bucket of money, it's time to move on. I once spent 98 days at sea. I never had a moment like that. After 30 days, it just got to be like that Dunkin' Donuts commercial where the guy is passing himself coming and going. We did have a lot of duck you moments, though. They went like this. Person 1, good morning. Person 2, duck you. Or, person 1, yeah, you're going to have to stay and fix that. Person 2, duck you. A bit different than the rest of these, but I am a biologist and I've done quite a bit of field work. One job I was working in Alaska and we were living in a tent in the bush for the summer. We were in a pretty bear heavy area and working with salmon put us right in the heart of their habitat. We had a bear fence surrounding the camp that was recharged on solar power. But apparently it came unhooked and no one noticed because we woke up to a grizzly pawing at our tent. My partner's screams scared it off pretty good, but we were definitely a lot more careful after that. I wrote a whole post about it right after it happened that gained some traction. But I was working in Afghanistan as a contract air traffic controller when our compound was hit by a suicide truck bomber. I was laying in bed when my wall and window blew in and flew over me. Most of the glass stuck into the opposite wall, which means if I had been standing up I would have been seriously injured. I ran to the safe room in my underwear with no shoes on, which caused me to cut my feet up from all the broken glass. The next day I was on a flight out. Here's a photo of the bomb site. I don't usually work in extreme situations. I'm a directional drill operator for underground utilitites, so it's fairly safe. But there was one job I had in Virginia for an electric conduit for a new launch pad for Wallops Island, where we had a very small amount of time to get a lot done. There was a week-long period where there was an intense thunderstorm every day, and we delayed the job as much as we could until we decided to say duck it and work through it because we were falling so far behind. Directional drills have an alarm for when the machine is electrified by, say, drilling through a power line. My strike alarm began to constantly chime from lightning crashes. I silently got in the truck and left. My husband worked in the oil fields. Our daughter died and they gave him 3 days of bereavement leave. 3 ducking days. He was done after that. Except for the rare cases like Deepwater Horizon. Working on offshore oil rigs is not extreme at all. Sure, there are things that can go wrong, but safety is always in focus. And there are several barriers before things get dangerous. Source: been working offshore for 10 years and love it. Worked for a company that sold and maintained equipment on large ships. Not that extreme, but my duck this moment was when all the safety belts were in use and a fishing boat that was heading out needed a motor replaced in a radar immediately. Had to climb a 10-meter mast with a 15-20 kg motor in one hand while they were loading the boat swaying from side to side. That was the day I quit. Worked at a deep shaft coal mine and spent a few years as a production supervisor. We were moving equipment out of an old part of the mine that we were about to seal up. The roof was sagging and the floor was heaving. Seemed like every time we went for a return trip, the roof was closer and closer to the top of the hauler. Finally, one of my employees used his right of refusal and said, "This is not safe. I'm not doing." And I was like, good enough for me. Let's go. I worked in gold mines for 3 years. And my duck this I'm out moment wasn't fully job related, either hazards or political bullet, but more about how it was affecting my home life balance. I would spend half the year at work missing out on my kid growing up, and when I'd get home I felt as though I was always in the way, disrupting my wife and child's schedule. So we decided duck it. I took all my vacations, started looking for a job. I found something, then handed in my 2 weeks. Pipe welder. I was sitting on the throat of a 16 inches weld 90 making a torch cut. I was 25 feet above a boiler that could not be shut down. Because of how high I was and a man lift was not an option, I had to sit on the pipe I was cutting. 1/3 into the cut, slag flew out of my cut and landed in my boot. I could not take my boot off for risk of falling. 4 months later my 3rd degree burns healed. It was unfortunate, but pipe welding is awesome and I loved the crew I worked with. I no longer am in this trade though for personal reasons. I worked fixing railway tracks for a while. Digs were horrible. The traveling was horrible. The tools were never in good enough condition. There's a spotters round the corners if you're ever working near a bend, with a button to cut all our tools off if there's a train coming. About 9 of us working and we hear the train before seeing it. We just get the tools and our bodies clear as a train comes flying past. Go down the track to see what happened and the spotter is sat with his phone having a Tommy crank. Couldn't keep working with people like that. That was the last straw. I am a mature person. Sees this post. Hessiman. US military contractor in the Middle East here. After getting rockets, rebels trying to break and exploding themselves at the gate at our base during my 90-120 days away from home. The only thing that makes AFCK this I'm out moments are the BS that I have to deal with other people on a daily basis. Not as extreme as others, but I used to work at a group home for troubled teens. One day during room searches, we found that the boys had smuggled in duct tape and had made wooden shanks. They were planning on taping down staff members and stabbing the duck out of us. I quit that day. My life is worth more than $9 an hour. Not really an extreme situation, but when I was doing construction as an engineer technician and I saw someone's legs get run over by a skid steer. They had to bring in a helicopter to get him to a hospital, but he ended up being alright. I was only making $14 an hour, and my boss was a D, so I quit eventually. It's not worth risking your livelihood to make some douchebag tons of money for just $14 an hour. I work in a galvanizing plant and I have a few moments. One being I'm a chemist here and I get the glory of breathing hydrochloric acid when my respirator fails, which happens quickly cause it's hydrochloric acid, and I get to cough up blood every 2 months. The other is working with 22,000 plus pound poles. We have a few drop every once in a while. One fell and crushed a porta potty. The poor guy driving the forklift resigned before he could be fired. He was as shaken up as I was, seeing as I was less than 20 feet away heading to that porta potty. Worked as a core drill helper on the Hagby in an underground mine. Only did it for 6 months though. Definitely not as dangerous as it used to be, but you were still underground and we were drilling through one of the faces, the end of the tunnel where you're blasting through. So if something was going to collapse it'd probably be there. It wasn't bad, but it was pretty hard work for $17 HR plus a itty bonus. Plus drillers are not the most nice or sane people. So it was working with a itty person in a itty place for itty money. Everything is about safety and all of my supervisors were miners, not drillers. So they had no idea what they were talking about. Half the stuff they do to make it safer just ended up getting in the way and making it more dangerous. as a midshipman on the Crimson Permanent Assurance, sailing the high accountant seas 4 decades ago. We engaged a very big corporation of America. It was a hostile maneuver. We fired our cabinet drawers into the control room. It was a direct hit. We boarded the vessel, which was 30 stories of 60s era commercial real estate. As I climbed inside, I was confronted immediately by a balding auditor brandishing a paperweight. I grabbed what appeared to be aluminum siding in an attempt at self-defense. In the process, I vaulted the auditor out the port side. He plummeted to his death a dozen or more stories into the accountant seas below. Never again, I vowed. Especially as the Crimson Permanent Assurance soon after plummeted down the sheer vertical side of the earth, which turns out to be flat. Not in a job you mentioned, but I think it's relevant when a bottle of chemical labeled Xu's death by inhalation was open on a bench right next to a walkway. Working the drilling rigs in Utah, pretty much that whole crew was spun to the nuts. I was floorhand, one step above the worm. Well, the driller was high as per usual, so high he was swatting bugs that weren't there, and this was an old rig. Manual brakes, not a top drive. Had to throw chain to brake connection. We were tripping pipe out of the hole. We had just racked a stand, and the elevators were coming back down, and fast. The driller was doing his thing and I see that he's away from the ducking handle. I yell for the worm to move his ass, cause he was where he shouldn't have been. I yell at the driller to get the duck on the handle. Neither one listens. 8,000 pounds of iron came crashing down out of the derrick. Crushed the worm. I had to take a hose and spray his brain off my boot. I quit roughnecking that day.